So I'd like to get the ball rolling by talking about Lamb House and Broadway Hotel, just because there's been a lot of conversations going on about those lately.
Yep, sure.
So Lamb House and the Broadway Hotel have kind of revealed certain deficiencies in state heritage laws. A 4ZZZ listener pointed out to me recently that heritage laws don't have room to assist people if they can't comply with the laws. So, what I want to ask is, in light of the current physical condition of Lamb House and Broadway and similar sites, do you feel that changes to existing heritage laws need to happen in order to support the owners of these sites?
Firstly, I think that sites of heritage value to both the city and the state are incredibly important, and I think the community overwhelmingly wants administrations at both the state and the council level to do as much as they possibly can to protect them for future generations. That's really clear. The There is a distinction between the Broadway and Lamb House. I think when it comes to Broadway, the Broadway Hotel, this has been a site that has been in the hands of someone who does have the financial capability to maintain and look after this property, and I think that's been made very clear, and I'm very pleased with the way that both council and state have worked together to stop the further demolition of the Broadway Hotel. And only recently did we see that the scope of demolition works has been significantly reduced, and those areas of the Broadway Hotel footprint that have been approved for demolition are on the recommendation of independent heritage experts who have basically said that they weren't able to be restored, that it's just impossible. So that's the air raid shelter as well as the pavilion, which were built many, many decades after the original Gothic building was constructed. With Lamb House, it's different in that the current owner has been unable, doesn't have the financial resources to support securing the site or maintaining it. And only recently I sat down with both the Environment and Heritage Minister at a state level, Minister Leanne Enoch, as well as the Lord Mayor, to discuss how we can better work together in order to protect this site. I was really pleased that Minister Leanne Enoch has again moved to issue a stop order, which means that no work, no demolition can happen on site, which is very important. And going forward, I think that a collaborative approach is critical and important. At the end of the day, Vivienne, these are sites that are privately owned, and there are lots of laws in place to protect that ownership. And so what we need is a collaboration by state and council and the actual property owner in order to achieve what the primary outcome is for the community, which is the preservation of these sites.
Yeah, yesterday the Brisbane Times wrote that the stop order was indeed extended for another 60 days. But it also mentioned that the state government and Brisbane City Council are not able to compulsorily acquire the property. Are the current actions to physically protect Lamb House from vandals and trespassers substantial, in your opinion?
I think they are substantial. I think that I would not be. I think it is the case that in all matters of public administration, things change, conditions change, and there's always room for improvement. So I'm not saying that there isn't room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. But I think that progress and improvements are done through more collaboration and listening to the community more than anything else.
assuming, like, best case scenario, Lamb House is put into the hands of the state government and the council to undergo whatever it needs to, like, we're just talking best case scenario here. What do you propose would happen, or what are the government trying to work towards with Lamb House?
Fundamentally, I think that both council and the state are really focused on preserving the site, first and foremostly. The state and council using powers, and that both administrations have received legal advice about whether or not compulsorily acquiring the site is possible, and my understanding is the legal advice is that it just cannot do that. I mean, we compulsory acquire privately owned property for a public purpose. So fundamentally, we've got to, there is that balance there. The state can't use its powers and council can't use its powers in a way that's disproportionate to the public good. So I think we need to keep that in mind, and both administrations have sought legal advice on this specific issue. But fundamentally, I think I think that sitting down and trying to work through what is the best way forward is the best mechanism. It is the best process. And I'm really pleased that we were able to do that recently with both the state and council. And at that meeting, I suggested that what both administrations should do on matters of heritage significance is do what we've seen done at a state and council level around active transport, and that is to, stop shuffling between both administrations and sit down, get stakeholders involved, get the experts involved, get the community involved in order to resolve the challenges and the complexities that come with what is the ultimate objective. And the ultimate objective in this matter is preserving the site.
I want to talk about a kind of loophole, I guess is the best word for it, in some of the heritage laws. So in February 2019, the Queensland government gave the Brisbane City Council greater power to force owners of heritage-listed structures to properly maintain their properties. And this is a great power to have, but these laws don't apply to places listed on the state's heritage register. I guess, case in point, the Lamb House is state heritage listed, so the council couldn't exactly force Joy Lamb to maintain the land and all of that stuff. So you've mentioned this sort of joint advisory body between the council and the government. Would this advisory body address that particular loophole?
Well, I assume that they will address a whole matter of issues. I think in the first instance, such a body should look at what is the immediate need here. And the immediate need, from what I understand, Vivienne, is to not only secure the site, but to fix what is the biggest risk to the property, and that is a significant hole in the roof, a significant structural default in the roof. That will, impact the whole structure of the building unless it's fixed. So there's immediate things that I think such an advisory group or such a collaborative working group can address. So there's immediate issues, and the longer term issues, I think, is something for both administrations to consider in the immediate, in the medium term, and in the long term. It is the case, I think, that what we have seen with the collaborative committee that's been established around active transport, that they've met to talk about, or they will be talking about things like better cycling and pedestrian access to places of public purpose. For example, the new high school at Dutton Park, or how we can actually have pop-up bicycle lanes throughout the city, improving bicycle access and safe bicycle access throughout the city. So I think that's a really excellent focus and an excellent objective of that particular active transport group. If we can take that template and apply it to heritage issues that are relevant to both state and local council, then I think that we can get a lot done collaboratively.
I want to sort of transition between topics, but before I do that, could you correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an article I read recently that implied, you used to go to the Broadway Hotel, while it was still, structurally intact and functioning as a pub. Do you have any memories associated with the site? Are there any, and is this true that you used to go to the Broadway?
Absolutely. I grew up in East Brisbane, so the Aussie National Hotel was a drinking hole, as was the Broadway. When I was really young and first out of school for a very short period of time, I was a telemarketer, and we as a team, as a group, used to go to the Broadway after our shifts and have drinks and stuff after our shift. So, the Broadway is it's a fantastic illustration of our history, of our architectural history here in southeast Queensland. I mean, we don't have. I can't think of another similarly Gothic style structure that that is part of our history, and that's why it's really important that it's preserved. But yeah, I've got fond memories, live bands that played at the Aussie Nash, and catching up with as a very young worker of spending hours at the Broadway Hotel. Just hanging out and getting to know people.
Are there any other heritage or cultural sites within Brisbane that hold a lot of meaning for you or any of the people in your community?
Well, there's quite a lot within South Brisbane. Many of them are actually at a local council heritage level because, lots of tin and timber structures. But there's a lot in South Brisbane, and that's because South Brisbane was one of the places in southeast Queensland that was settled, at the turn of the last century, before then, at the turn of the 19th century. So there's a lot of places of historical significance. It's really sad that we've actually lost a lot of them. But we really need to repurpose, and we need to make them sites that the public can use and enjoy, and to soak up some of Queensland's heritage and history, like the Thomas Dixon Dance Centre, for example. This used to be an old boot factory at the end of Montague Road, and I'm really proud of the fact that it's home of the Queensland Ballet. And what we have seen through the leadership of Lee is that ballet in Queensland grow at a rapid rate, and turning this building into something that is not only fit for purpose for the Queensland Ballet and their expanding demand, but also something that the public can use, Queenslanders can use right around southeast Queensland. So I think that's a great example of how we can turn our heritage, something that's iconic and has been part of Brisbane for 2 centuries, into something that can be used for generations to come.
I'd like to shift the focus to less on local specific heritage and more on Aboriginal sacred sites and lands within Queensland.
Yep.
So in recent years, there's been a lot of controversy about certain mining and infrastructure projects, not just within Queensland, but all across Australia. You've got the Jaburong trees in Victoria. You had the recent destruction of sacred Aboriginal caves by Rio Tinto. And there's ongoing controversy about the Carmichael coal mine polluting traditional lands and waters and what the effect might be on native wildlife. When it comes to mining and infrastructure developments under the current Labor government and, an ongoing one, all things going well in the upcoming election, are there going to be increased measures to ensure that more Aboriginal land is protected from pollution and development?
Fundamentally, I think that the protection of Indigenous land and things that are precious and culturally important to First Nations people is a shared responsibility, whether you're a mining company, whether you're a government, whether you're living in an urban environment and enjoying places and spaces that used to be sacred to First Nations people. It's a shared responsibility. And how we achieve that first and foremostly, I think, is to ensure that First Nations people have got a seat at the table and are able to negotiate their priorities and what is culturally and significant and important to them. That's why I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we have started a treaty process here in Queensland. This is actually about First Nations people being at the decision-making table. It's about all of Queensland actually understanding the truth of how our state was settled and how we have prospered at the expense of First Nations Queenslanders, and reconciling with that and moving forward. What that means is not only that sites that are important and significant to First Nations people are protected, but also that there is economic prosperity and for First Nations people, that there is that we see a closing of the gap when it comes to life expectancy and education outcomes. We have got to change the relationship between non-Indigenous Queenslanders and Australians and First Nations Queenslanders and Australians. And I'm incredibly proud that it's the Palaszczuk Labor government that has been at the forefront of this, reconciling with our past, whether that was in settling the class action for stolen wages in Queensland. This is the largest human rights class action settlement in Australia's history, and I'm very proud of the role I played in that. This means that there will be people who for 30 years had their wages stolen, and they will be repaid, or they will get a settlement out of that class action. And that is what the Palaszczuk Labor government has done in addition to treaty. And what we have also recently seen is that for the first time in Australia's history, we are taking traditional law, L-O-R-E, and writing it into Queensland statute, Queensland law, L-A-W, when it comes to the traditional child-rearing practices in the Torres Strait. Now, the Torres Strait is a long way away from Brisbane and the southeast Queensland corner. But, Vivienne, if I told you the big impact that this would have in the lives of so many thousands of Torres Strait Islander Queenslanders, it will just make their lives so much better. It will give them the dignity and the rights that we all enjoy as people who go around carrying a driver's licence, or we've got a birth certificate that accurately reflects who our parents are and where we come from. This is something that has not happened for thousands of Torres Strait Islanders in Queensland because their custom and practice has not been respected and reflected in Queensland law, and we are changing that. We are on the brink of passing legislation that gives effect to their cultural practices. Not gives effect to, but actually honours their cultural practices and ensures that Torres Strait Islanders who are reared in the Kupaya Maskai way are not left behind and are not invisible throughout the state and throughout our normal structures.
With regards to ensuring that Aboriginal members have a place at the table when discussing mining and infrastructure decisions and just ensuring that gaps are closed, you talked a lot about how Labor has been like at the forefront of all of that, now and, in the past. But I'm curious to see how Labor will implement these in the future. Are there any future goals or any future targets from Queensland Labor for this?
Well, I think it would be wrong for any political party to set targets that aren't informed by First Nations people. I think that treating First Nations people as a homogenous group and not a very complex and very incredibly varied population. I mean, there are many countries within Queensland that are First Nations people countries, and they have different priorities and different aspirations. And to sort of say that we speak on their behalf and we're going to set these targets on their behalf, I think is pretty inconsistent with the whole treaty process. But what I will say is that, Queensland Labor has had a First Nations person sitting around the cabinet table informing decisions that are made. We have elected the first Torres Strait Islander person anywhere in an Australian Parliament here in Queensland in Cynthia Louis, and we have had a third First Nations person elected to Parliament. So here in Queensland we have got 3 First Nations people within the Labor Party caucus, and I can tell you that they are vocal and they are strong, and they come representing the voices and the concerns of community. So in terms of how we walk this journey together, we walk it together, and we walk it together respectfully, by understanding that our aspirations should not be at the exclusion or separate from the representation and the position that First Nations people put to government through their processes. They're talking to community, they're being informed by voices at community level into government processes.
Thank you for clarifying that about the targets thing. I shouldn't have used that phrase. I'd like to shift more towards just general Labor plans and policies for the upcoming election.
Sure.
COVID-19, the word no one wants to hear really.
Unfortunately, we have to, yeah.
Yeah. It's created changes on pretty much every level within politics and just how we function as a society. So the plans and policies that were stipulated in the 2019 Labor state platform, they may not be the same, or just there may be differences in when and how they are implemented. So I'd like to know, what can Queenslanders expect from Labor?
I think in terms of the path forward, Vivienne, one of our, I think the most critical mission going forward is to make sure that we are prioritising and looking after the health of Queenslanders. I mean, nobody wants to see what's happening in Victoria replicated here in Queensland. So first and foremostly, we need to make sure that we do not get a community outbreak of coronavirus. That would see, again, a significant economic shutdown. And I can tell you, in terms of the businesses and the workers that I talk to each and every day, that is what is driving their anxiety more than anything else. They do not want to see an economic lockdown, so that has got to be a fundamental priority of anyone going forward, but I know that it's Labor's priority. Secondly, our path to economic recovery. I think that it is really clear that COVID has come along and it has really revealed the cracks within our economy, and we need to talk about them honestly, and we need to actually work together to fix those cracks. to make sure that young workers do not enjoy the same level of employment security and prosperity that their parents enjoyed, that we don't see an escalation in insecure work and low wages and insecure jobs, that we do see an investment in public infrastructure, public services, but also a stimulation of more skills training and an investment in more skills training and more higher education training. I mean, we're having this conversation today on a day that the federal Morrison LNP government are introducing some horrific changes to higher education in our nation. And I just think it's really, really problematic for us to be seeing a federal government shrink its investment in higher education and transfer the costs of degrees like humanities, for example, onto individual students. Now, I've got a humanities degree and I've got a master's, but can I tell you that what the federal government is proposing here would be will disproportionately impact students, and I don't think that's the way that we chart a pathway forward towards a fair economic recovery for all Queenslanders and all Australians. So, it's a long answer, but it's a very important question you've asked. What are our priorities? It's to keep Queenslanders healthy and safe, and it's to make sure that we have a fair and an equally prosperous economic recovery for Queenslanders going forward.
Out of the proposed plans and policies that Labor has for Queensland, I was just hoping to ask, what are sort of the central issues for you personally this election?
Well, I think that my priorities absolutely are around the economic security of workers in my community, businesses in my community. There's a lot of young workers in my local community, and I know that for those young workers who can't access a job currently, the thought of job seeker being reduced, it is causing a great level of anxiety and stress. And it's not just young workers, it's women who are escaping domestic violence. Previously, on the previous job New Start level, if you're a mum with 2 kids escaping a violent relationship, there is no way that you can make ends meet on $40 a day. What the job seeker level, where the job seeker is currently at, where income or income benefit support is currently at, needs to stay, and it needs to be permanent. And I think that Queenslanders who rely on income support need to actually understand that it's not going to be taken away from them in 2 months' time or 3 months' time. So, me and my colleagues have all called for a permanent rise in the New Start, or keeping it at the job seeker level. But this is something that I was calling for a long time ago, when ACOS was running their campaign and QCOS was running their campaign. There is no way that you can't be moved by the stories of people who are trying to make ends meet when the government is giving such little in return. There's no way that you can get yourself dressed for a job interview, or access transport so you can get around to interviews, or you can look after your children, or pay your utility bills. So that's a big issue for me: income support and making sure that there is decent income support. But on top of that, Vivienne, I'm very worried. I'm very worried about a whole range of really big reforms that we have been able to secure, whether that's abortion law reform. And we all know that the LNP is out there saying that they are going to water down these laws. So I am deeply worried that having achieved such significant reform for women in this state, the election of an LNP government will see that taken away. We've also seen great progress towards voluntary assisted dying in Queensland, and I know that the LNP will not progress this reform. They will not listen to the Law Reform Commission, they will not listen to the Parliamentary Committee and all of the many thousands of Queenslanders who made submissions in support of voluntary assisted dying. They will ignore their voices and they will pander to the extremists within their party and not progress this important issue. On top of that, I think that, treaty, I really want to see justice for First Nations Queenslanders. I'm very proud of my track record on this front, and I know that under an LNP government, treaty will stop. I personally invited the LNP to nominate someone to be part of the eminent persons panel to start the process, and they didn't even respond to the invitation. They didn't respond to my letter. That gives you an indication of how they feel about justice for First Nations people. We also know that when it comes to deforestation or tree clearing in Queensland, they've already said that they're going to wind back the laws that Labor put in place that I championed in terms of ensuring that we are not bulldozing down huge tracts of native vegetation in Queensland for agricultural purposes. It was under the Newman LNP government that Queensland became one of the deforestation hotspots in the world. We actually were clearing more land than Brazil because of changes that the Newman government made to past Labor government's laws around tree clearing. So they've already said they're going to do that, and we will be back there bulldozing trees under an LNP government. And also at a very local level, and I've worked with many organisations, whether it's Epilepsy Queensland or the Advanced Breast Cancer Support Group. These are organisations that are made up of volunteers. They are supporting Queenslanders, who are sick, Queenslanders who have a terminal diagnosis. They had their funding cut, and those that didn't have their funding cut got contracts for funding that included gag clauses. This will be back quick, smart. Absolutely under an LNP government, I have no doubt that they will silence people and they will take away money as punishment. And we also know that under an LNP government, there were deep cuts to education and to health. And quite frankly, at this particular point in time, that is not something that we should be entertaining at all.
I just wanted to get clarification on something that you mentioned in the last answer you gave. You were talking about how the LNP would water down existing abortion laws in Queensland, and I was curious to know just what that would look like.
Well, they haven't come clean on it, Vivienne. They haven't come clean on it, but they have confirmed that they will go back and they will have a look at the legislation and they will make changes. And I sat in the chamber and I listened to their contribution when it came to decriminalising abortion in our state. And I do know, these are the people who voted against Labor's laws to prohibit gay conversion therapy in Queensland. So make no mistake, the Liberal National Party in Queensland has very extreme views when it comes to the rights of women, when it comes to the rights of LGBTIQ Queenslanders, when it comes to First Nations Queenslanders. So I think it's a very important question that you asked. Unfortunately, I can't answer it because the LNP is not being transparent with the people of Queensland, with the women of Queensland.
Thank you for providing clarity on that. I think there's many listeners out there that would be just very anxious to see what these watering downs would look like. So yeah, thank you for giving clarity on that.
Vivienne, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people want to know, and I think that it would create a significant amount of distress for many women to think that after having achieved such a change that meant that their health and their autonomy and their rights were protected and preserved in legislation, that would now be taken away. Yeah.
This kind of brings us to the close of today's interview. I just had one more question, and I was hoping to ask if there were any local or Australian artists that you'd like to hear on the airwaves after your interview.
I'd have to say Kurilpa Reach would be terrific. They're a great local band, and they've played up at Woodford, and that would be great. So if you wanted to play a bit of Kurilpa Reach, that would be good.
Yeah, no worries. Can do that. Thank you so much for talking to me. It's been just really illuminating, and I've really just enjoyed hearing just all of the plans and policies that could come into effect. I'm really looking forward to, I don't know, just seeing what the election brings, I guess. Like, it'll be yeah.
Well, thank you, Vivienne, for having me on, and thank you for, I want to thank all of your listeners for being actively interested and caring about the community and the state and the world that we grow up in, that we live in, and I'm very happy to come back on anytime.
No worries.